Oh, oh, yeah. Oh, oh, yeah.
Hey guys, it's Emily, the controversial mom, and thanks for joining me again this week. I'm going to throw you for a loop and talk about something that is not controversial nor comical, but yet common sense and practical. I want to talk about the role that women play in politics. Now, naturally, women do not gravitate to the world of politics because, well, quite frankly, it's kind of cutthroat and brutal. And that's just not a place that women like to be in. So, for all of these decades, women have really and truly not been heavily involved in politics. And I can prove that with two simple statistics. When we're talking about congressional level politics, so really your House of Representatives at kind of the national level, 29.2% of the entire congressional level is made up of women. That's really not a whole lot of women involved in the world of politics at a national level. And to bring it down to a more local level for the state of Alabama, in our state house, 18.6% of our representatives are women. So there's not a lot of women involved, even at the state level or at the national level. So, really and truly, it's fair to say that men are running our country. Now, I say that kind of half heartedly because while it is true that the majority of those representing us are men, I'm not saying in a way that I think that our country is sexist or anything of that nature. I think that women equally can run for office and they can win over men. It's just that women choose not to run for office. They choose not to get involved in politics. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think there's a lot of things in our country that really and truly men just do better at. Take the role for president, for example. I personally do not think that we ever need to have a female president, not because women are not capable of doing it, but just the role in itself is pretty brutal. I mean, you think about decisions that presidents have to make, like taking out terrorist organizations, choosing to send our soldiers to war. Those are pretty heavy decisions, and women naturally are nurturing, and we don't want to deal with things that put children in harm's way. And all of the soldiers we send out into war zones are somebody's children. So women naturally just do not fit well in that position. So I do think it's better that we have a male president. And then in a lot of these committees, that it's men making these decisions. Veterans Affairs committees, that's another one where I think really and truly men are better suited for that simply because our veterans, our military is predominantly made up of men. So having a man in charge of that just naturally fits better because they understand the male role and the male mindset a lot differently. So I am by no means saying that I think our country is sexist because such a small percentage of women are in these positions. It's just simply a statistic of women don't get involved in politics, and it can kind of be proven through those statistics that I threw out there. But that doesn't mean that women don't play a role in politics. And that's really where I want to focus the conversation this week. So, in the state of Alabama, like I mentioned, it's 18.6% of our representatives are women. Of those women, one of the fiercest women in the House is someone by the name of Susan DuBose. Now, Susan is in her, I believe it's still her first term as an elected representative of the state. And Susan is fierce. Like, she is such a fighter. She has been fighting for so much common sense legislation in our state. So, in her first term, she filed legislation and passed it that prevents boys from playing in girls' sports. She has filed legislation for 2 years already. This next session, that's right around the corner, will be the third, to define what is a woman or the Women's Privacy Bill. She is filing legislation for this upcoming session that deals with the medical age of consent in our state. And I've talked about that a little bit in the past, where our medical age of consent is currently 14, and she's filing legislation to move that up to 18. So, all of this legislation is extremely controversial and extremely important, not only to just women in our communities, but to moms specifically. And that's what I really want to focus on. When I say women getting involved in politics, I'm really specifically talking about the moms in our communities. So, like I mentioned, Susan's filed this legislation, the What is a Woman bill or the Women's Privacy Bill. It's a very simple bill. It basically just codifies into law what is male and what is female. It's very simple and it doesn't sound like it really does a whole lot on the surface, but it's actually very foundational. So, if we can define into law what is male, what is female, by default, you kind of back into what is not a male and what is not a female. So when we're dealing with public restrooms, we can then legally say this is a woman's restroom and only women can access this restroom. And again, by default, you're saying those that are not women, as legally defined, cannot enter that space. It's very common sense, but for some reason, for 2 years, Alabama has not been able to pass this bill into law. I am hopeful that going into this next session, that's all going to change and we're going to get it passed. But here's the deal. I don't think it's that Alabama legislators don't care about these bills. I think they do care. I know they care. I've sat down with so many of these men and talked to them about this legislation, and they've all agreed this is really critical stuff. We need to do this. But when we get into session, none of these bills are making it across the goal line. They're moving forward, they're getting some progress, they're getting out of committee, all of that, but they're not truly making it across the goal line to get to the governor to sign into law. So that's a major issue. My personal theory on it is because our legislature is made up mainly of men, they do not naturally prioritize these bills to be at the top of their list. For instance, men don't really care so much about defining a woman into law to then get men out of women's bathrooms because they do not experience this on a day to day basis. They do not understand the full concern of women in these bathrooms because they're not women themselves. I think they care. They'll definitely vote for the legislation when it gets before them. But in terms of them having to prioritize that type of a bill over everything else, it's just not on the forefront of their minds because they don't live these experiences out on a regular basis like we do. Dads specifically don't deal with taking kids to the doctor as much as the moms do. It's just a default setting on who does what in the relationship. Moms typically are taking their kids to the doctor. So dads probably aren't paying too much attention to the fact that at 14, kids can make medical decisions for themselves. Moms are going to experience that first and foremost because they're dealing with that. Moms are taking care of going to school and talking to the counselor and taking kids to the doctor and making sure vaccines are up to date and taking kids to the dentist, all those things. Moms do that more than men. So moms care more about the age of consent issue because moms are dealing with it more on a day to day basis. And our legislators are very much like that. They're men, so most of them are not dealing with taking kids to the doctor and dealing with counselors and all that. And a lot of them don't have young children. They've got grandkids. So even more distance between them and the reality of this issue around medical age of consent. So I'm just simply saying I don't think that the bills that we as mothers, we as women think are the utmost importance are on the forefront of our legislators' minds. They support them. If it comes down to it, they will vote to support them. I want to be really clear on that. But in terms of them prioritizing it, it's just not happening. And that's where we come into play. So, Alabama has roughly 5 million people in our population. A little over half of that is women, but we'll call it just split down the center. 2.5 million women live in the state of Alabama. That's a lot of women. Now, obviously, not all of those are 18 or older, so they can't vote, but we'll say roughly 1.5 million can vote. That's 1.5 million voices that are just being silent right now and not calling legislators. And that's where all of you come into play. That's what I want to focus on is that group of women that are of voting age, live in the state of Alabama, and can get involved to make your voices be heard. You don't have to run for office in order to have impact. You can do a lot just by being a mom that makes phone calls, sends emails, sends text messages, whatever it is that you can do in your very busy schedule. There's plenty of ways for you as women and moms to get involved in this fight. So, what we need more women doing, more moms doing, is reaching out to legislators during session and telling them what you want them to do, what you want their priorities to be. Because if you don't tell them what the priorities need to be as their constituents, they're just going to do what they want to do. And I don't say that in a negative way. I'm just saying if they don't know what their constituents want, they're going to do what the lobbyists want. That's just the reality of politics. They're all that way. So, moms, women, you need to get involved. Pick up the phone, send an email, and call your legislators and tell them very politely, these are the priorities that I want you focused on. And if you don't focus on this, if you don't get these bills across the goal line, when it comes time to vote for someone to fill this seat in 2026, you will not get my vote. I don't know who I'm voting for, but it will not be you if these bills do not move and we get these across the goal line because our kids need it and our parents need it. So, what are the bills that I'm talking about? There's a long list of them. I'm going to kind of go the top of I'll list out the top bills that I'm tracking. There's a lot more. There's still going to be some that are filed that are not even on my radar yet. But I can give you the ones right now that I am focused on for me personally. And then as Moms for Liberty, what we're focused on as well. So I mentioned we have the women's privacy bill that Susan DeBose has filed. That's coming up again for the third year. Hopefully, our legislators can figure out how to get that across the goal line. It did move a good bit this past year. I will give them credit for that. But pretty much all of this cultural bills that we've pushed for all died last year on the very last day of session because gambling monopolized the entire session. So that's one thing we've got to stop is gambling is not a priority for the parents and the women and the mothers in the state of Alabama. That does not need to be the number one goal of our legislator. And if it is, then we've got a whole lot of people we've got to get out of office because they're not listening to their constituents. So, one, gambling is not a priority. Two, what is a priority? The women's privacy bill that I mentioned, the medical age of consent bill that I mentioned. That will raise the age of medical consent from 14 to 18. That is huge. Well past due. We must have that. Susan DeBose is sponsoring both of those bills. We have the gender ideology bill that's coming from Mac Butler. This, again, will be the third year in a row that he's filed this bill because our legislature cannot figure out how to prioritize this bill. That's another bill. It got down to the very last day and it died in the Senate because gambling took over everything. So, Mac's bill is the gender ideology bill. It will prohibit any type of discussion related to gender ideology or sexual orientation in public K 12 schools. Right now, the law goes to K 5. His bill will extend that all the way up through K 12. That is critical that we get that through. I'll be talking in future podcasts about what's going on in our public schools, and this bill is going to become extremely important in trying to get a bunch of stuff out of our schools. So there's that one. Arnold Mooney is filing or has filed a bill that will deal with libraries' exemption to the obscenity law. So right now, libraries, public and school libraries, are exempt from the obscenity clause. So if you go to Barnes and Noble, they have to put anything that has any type of nudity, whether it's pictures or it's drawings, they have to put that in the adult section because it's considered nudity, it's pornographic, it has to be 18 and up to access it. Our public libraries are not required to do that. That's why we've got all of this content in our libraries that really are just not age appropriate. So his bill will basically make public libraries have to follow the same law of someone like a Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, all of that. It's a very simple bill. It's just uniformity across the board. So Arnold's going to be, he already has filed that one. That's the second year in a row that we've had to file that bill. You have Kenneth Pascal, who's filing another bill to deal with parental rights. He did pass a bill, I think it was 2 years ago, that created a law that said basically parents get to choose the upbringing of their children. That did pass, it went into law. He is filing new legislation that actually will amend the state constitution. So eventually it would go to a constitutional ballot, or it would be a constitutional vote on the ballot but he's got to get the legislation through first. So his is very common sense. It just would be legislation to amend state constitution to embed parental rights there, which is what we need. We don't want to just have a law that legislation can change in 2 or 3 years. If it's in state constitution, then it's there. The only way to get it out would be another constitutional or another amendment to the Constitution, which is going to be really hard to do. So his bill will be super imperative. He's also filing legislation that would make churches essential. So, in the event we had future lockdowns, the governor, the president could not shut down our churches ever again. They would be deemed essential and they would be remain open if there ever was another shutdown or pandemic or any of that. And there's another bill by Representative, gosh, I forgot his name. It'll come to me in a minute. Um, but it is legislation that will prohibit cell phone use during school. So kids can still take their cell phones, but during class, they would not be able to pull it out and use it. So basically, they would have a little cubby when they go into the classroom. They would have to put their cell phone in, and when class is over, they could take it. Sellers is his name, Representative Sellers. Another common sense one where we're not trying to prohibit kids from having a cell phone. We just want them to not access it during class because not only does it distract them from learning, it distracts others in the classroom as well. It distracts the teacher. So, all common sense legislation, all things that we need to be passing, all of these should be flying through in the first half of session. This really shouldn't require getting down to the very last day of session to figure out we've got to scramble and get stuff done. So that's where you, parents, moms, women, come into play. That's a long list of legislation that you need to be contacting your elected officials on and saying, these are the bills that we want prioritized in session. We want you passing these first before anything else. And if these don't get through session this year, when your seat comes up in 26, I'll be finding somebody new to vote for. So that was a lot of legislation. You probably have not remembered half of that because it was a lot to throw at you. I'm going to make this really easy. Follow us at Moms for Liberty Alabama on all social media platforms. It's very easy. We put out content all the time during session that gives you updates on all of these bills, plus new ones that are coming out. And we tell you exactly what the bill says, why it's good, why it's bad, who's sponsoring it, most importantly, what actions we need all of you to take. We list the phone numbers if you want to call people. We list email addresses if you want to email people and just simply say, here's the bill. Here's what we want you to say. Please contact these people. And that's all you have to do. We don't ask you to be nasty. We're certainly not pushing you to be nasty. We want you to have good conversations with those that are elected to represent us. But they need to hear your voice. They need to know what their constituents and the people of Alabama want first and foremost. And that starts by you picking up the phone, calling them, or sending an email. So go follow us on social media. It's Moms for Liberty Alabama on all the socials. It's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's Getter, it's Truth. There's probably another one out there that I'm forgetting. But we try to make it super easy. And if you don't do any social media stuff, you can become a member. It's free. Go to momsforliberty.org and join the Madison County chapter. We send out email alerts on this stuff as well. We have a legislative page where you can follow all sorts of information. There's videos out there that talk about all of the bills. So if you don't want to read, you can watch a 2-minute clip and figure out what's going on with them. So we put out a lot of content because we want to make it easy for parents specifically to get engaged and let their voices be heard. So I hope that this was helpful in the sense of explaining all of the bills that are out there and why we need your voices involved. So I hope that you will follow us and figure out where your passion is and how you can get involved specifically when it comes to legislative efforts and start helping our legislators to prioritize the bills that align with your values. So thanks for stopping by, guys. And until next time, be controversial.